We don't even need to do this roundtable. You just play the rest of that record. That sounded really good. Folks out there in replacement land, I am Bob Mayer. I'm author of Trouble Boys, A True Story of the Replacements, and I am co-producer of the project we are here to talk about, which is The Replacements. Pleased to meet me, Deluxe. You can see that. Joining me today is my co-conspirator and co-producer on this project with RHINO's A&R, Jason Jones. Jason, how are you?
I'm doing well. Happy release day.
Happy release day to you. So we're excited to be bringing this deluxe version of Pleased to Meet Me. I guess it almost was a 33 and a third edition.
This close.
We missed it by a couple. This close. And what it is basically an expanded, truly expanded version of the Replacements 1987 album that they recorded at Ardent Studios in Memphis with Jim Dickinson producing. And it was their second major label album for Sire. And this new package, again, which is available in stores now, and hopefully hurtling to you if you ordered it from RHINO Direct or from any other online retailer, is 55 tracks. It includes a newly remastered version of the original album, includes the band's 1986 demo session for it, recorded at Blackberry Way, includes a totally alternate running order and mix of the record that was kind of the the early rough mix, which is on an LP, and then there's 3 CDs of all the material, the demos, outtakes, different versions of things, alternates, and so forth. And we're very excited to have a couple great guests on to discuss it, people who are actually involved in the making of the record. Let me first bring in Luther Dickinson. Can we get Luther up there, Marty? There's the man himself, Luther Dickinson, son of Jim Dickinson and an amazing musician and producer in his own right. You know him from the North Mississippi All-Stars. He was also played with the Black Crowes for many years, as a songwriter, producer. Coming to us from Nashville. Luther, how are you, sir?
Great, man. Good to see you, Bob, and all the Matts out there.
And the great thing about Luther is, I don't know if we'll find out more if it was actually his first session, but he was 13 or 14 when he recorded on the song Shooting Dirty Pool on this record. So certainly the youngest person, maybe, well, just probably about the same age as a young Thomas Stinson on the first record, but certainly one of the youngest people ever to play on a Replacements album. Also joining us is Jim Lancaster. If you can bring Jim in. Jim has an incredible 50-year history in music as a musician, engineer, producer, songwriter. He's down in Valparaiso, Florida now. He owns Playground Studios. Germane to this record, Jim, we credited him in the preview as an engineer, assistant engineer, but Jim wore many, many hats on this record. He sang backgrounds. He played some bass on some of these tracks you'll hear in this box set. He also had the privilege/burden of taking the Replacements around Memphis, since none of them drove or knew how to drive or knew where they were going, babysat them and so forth, and really was part and parcel of the entire sessions, in part of his working relationship with the late Jim Dickinson, who he worked with for many, many decades. So Jim, great to have you here to talk about this record with us.
Well, thank you very much. I'm excited about the release. I got it a couple of days ago. I listened to it, and I got to tell you, I'm just simply blown away by the mixes so far. Now, the overall package, I mean, it's a record collector's wet dream. I don't know what you want to say, but it is. I mean, and I'm not a record collector. I'm a record maker, but still, it's a great package, Bob, and I hand it to you and Jason. Fantastic job.
Well, that is the endorsement, you folks. That's all you need. You should all just be ordering right now if you haven't already. So let's get into. I know Jim and I know Luther for many years, and Jason and I have been working closely. So we're going to try and keep this as casual as possible. But let's just so I set the scene a little bit. So the Replacements, as I said, this was their second record for Sire. They had made Tim up in Minneapolis with Tommy Ramone producing, and that had come out to critical acclaim. But it was also a transition point in the band, 1985 into 1986. And one of the things that happened, a couple things happened. They parted ways with their original manager, Peter Jesperson, who was their great benefactor and who discovered the band and signed the band. And then in the process of doing the demos for this, they also parted ways with their founder and lead guitarist, Bob Stinson. In fact, the demos that are on the second disc that you hear that they recorded in Minneapolis, part of them were done with Bob Stinson and part of them were just as a 3-piece. So that summer into the fall of '86, the Replacements were had almost decided to break up. They were trying to decide whether to keep going. It was obviously a pretty big split and crack in the band when Bob left, or where they were forced to part with Bob. And they went through a series of producer interviews in New York and Los Angeles, and they could not find somebody who they really wanted to produce the record, or who had the, let's say, the balls or the guts or the brains to produce this record. And so it came around finally to Mr. Jim Dickinson and Ardent Studios in Memphis. Jim was for many years a great musician, music maker, producer. I mean, he's probably best known for playing on the Rolling Stones session in Muscle Shoals. He had obviously produced Big Star Third, had a whole history at Ardent in Memphis through the 60s and early 70s, and then had done incredible work with the Dixie Flyers, the house band in Miami for Atlantic Records, and then ultimately worked with Ry Cooder and many other artists into the 70s and the 80s. And by, I think, the early 80s, Luther, correct me if I'm wrong, he had done all this stuff with Cooder and the film soundtracks, and was starting to produce, I guess, this new generation of young bands, the Green on Reds, the True Believers. He did some stuff with Jason and the Scorchers. And so the Replacements kind of falls into that. Tell us a little bit about, ultimately the Replacements decided, we're going to come down to Memphis. We want to get out of Minneapolis. They'd never been outside of Minneapolis to make a record. We want to make a record, on Jim's home turf. Ardent was an amazing technical studio at that time, thanks to John Fry, the owner, and there was really at the cutting edge. It wasn't a small outpost, a lot of major label projects being done there. So, talk us through, I guess, where Jim was at that point in 86, what he knew of the Replacements, what you recall sort of being a kid and being in the mix there at that time, Luther.
He was really enjoying this new era of producing younger bands. It started with the True Believers, and then Green on Red, and then the Replacements. And he was really like rising to a new pinnacle of his career. And he loved teaching. He loved these young guys. He loved he pulled out our grandfather's old flannel shirts. So, one of his mottos was like, never outdress a client, So he, at the time, his hair was way down. It was the last gasp long hair for Dad, And he had this really long hair, these crazy wooden glasses, kind of like these. And he had the old flannel shirts. And supposedly when they first met, he busted in wearing the flannel shirt. And Tommy was like, look, Paul, he's just like us. And Paul was like, he is not just like us. Do not be fooled. But he loved it, man. And he had been working with Chuck and Danny of Green on Red right before that. And Dad didn't know much about the Replacements, to be honest. He dug the music when he heard it, but he went and saw them at the Antenna Club, I think, and met them. That's a possible, maybe that's part of the legend. But Danny from Green on Red was like, you're gonna like him, So he had a little inside scoop, and he thought it was important for his victims, as he called the artists, to come to him. And he didn't want to go to Minneapolis or LA and work with bands, or Austin. He enjoyed it, but he would rather the people come to Memphis and breathe the humidity and eat the barbecue and walk down the street and feel the vibe. He was a huge champion and believer of the Memphis vibe and how it captured on record, And, that brings to mind one of his sayings, like he would say, misery sticks to the tape. It's important for him to keep it fun and inspired, and he would do whatever it took to capture the inspired moment and to foster it and help it and protect it. And he would use any means of modern technology to get, as he called it, a hi-fi recording of a lo-fi sound, and that was Ardent at that era all the way, be it ZZ Top or etc. Ardent's history was, based on the Memphis community of recording enthusiasts who wanted to be as good as Abbey Road. And John Fry had the means and the ambition and the foresight to keep up, and he had completely world-class recording equipment the whole time. And be it, Stax would mix there, High Records would mix there. It was where you went in Memphis when you really had to, bring your game up. Dad loved getting a really hi-fi recording of whatever crazy primitive moment he captured.
Right. And this was this album was recorded on a Mitsubishi 32-track digital board that was pretty new at the time. So, Jim, tell us a little bit about coming in there. What's interesting is you got a really great set of engineers working on this record, in addition to yourself, in John Hampton and Joe Hardy. I think Joe Hardy started the sessions. Hampton came on, and then sort of they both worked on the mix. But talk a little bit about, you picked the replacements up at the airport, I believe, and sort of were taking them around. What was your sense? What do you recall from Jim, or just your initial impressions of the replacements as they came in?
Well, first of all, I think it's a misnomer that that on Chris's suitcase that had the beautiful pen drawing on leather of Jed Clampett. I think that was his guaranteed intro to the South. You know, I mean, people
Right.
thought a big deal about that. Well, look, I just looked at it and said, man, that's freaking great art, you know? So now people have made a big deal about it. And really, I think Chris sat there in Minneapolis somewhere, where they say Minnesota, and drew Jed Clampett on his suitcase, you know?
Yeah.
It made no difference to me whatsoever. I was going to go get the drummer, you know?
Right.
The Mats, when they arrived, were a little skittish, as you would be. I mean, you know, we're talking about coming to Memphis, where, you know, Martin Luther King was assassinated, and all these various things have happened over the years, the different strikes. I mean, Memphis is a city on the bluff, and they don't call it the Bluff City for nothing. And, you know, so yes, they were a little skittish when they got there, but we had a little cosmos around us that allowed for us to do exactly what we wanted to do, plus go out. I mean, outside of Ardent, and enjoy ourselves, you know, because it was
Right.
all part of the session. You know, it was all part of the session.
Right. Well, I want to ask you about that in a minute, but let me ask you. So, coming into this session, the replacements were working as a three-piece, as a trio for the first time, and I know one of the things. It's an interesting story. They came in and set up Chris's drums, and tell the story of the barrel of green sweep at the end of his kick drum. I know one of the things that both Hardy and Hampton and Jim, and I'm sure yourself, were very cognizant of was rhythm tracks and drum tracks, and how important that was as a foundation of a record, and everything that Chris was doing. So tell, if you recall, tell the story of what they would do, just as, I guess, as a mental trick to kind of keep him focused on his kick drum. Bob,
let me call you back on that a little bit. Now on the new mixes, I hear our tube. We did. I'm going to tell you, I don't know who mixed this, but anyway. So the true story is, yes, I think Panda did some stuff for John, but I know I went downtown while they recorded one song, and I went downtown and I picked up a barrel that was, you know, about so high and about the size of a bass drum. Now, when I got back, I turned it loose to Hardy and Hampton, and they went nuts. They started sticking microphones. We drilled a few holes. They stuck a few microphones in the holes, and of course, one at the end. We cut a circle at the end of the tube.
Right.
Literally, I mean, of course, I give the mixes credit now, but, you know, we've advanced a little bit since 1986. So I wouldn't expect anything less, but you can actually hear our tube there. Now,
so Jim, let me just, for the folks that don't know what we're talking about, is part of the reason why I think Chris Mars's drums sound so incredible on this record is the focus that the engineers, and John Hampton, one of the engineers, was a drummer himself, put on Chris's drums. And so what they did is, as Jim would like to say, as a psychological trick, is they took a barrel of green sweep, which was a kind of industrial floor cleaner in this giant barrel, and they cut it off the ends and they affixed it to his kick drum. And again, it probably didn't change the sound too much, although Jim says he can hear it now, but it certainly focused him on playing. And I think if you listen to this record, a lot of what makes it so powerful, in part because it's recorded as a power trio, as a three-piece essentially, is some of the tricks you guys were employing down there. So I'm sorry to interrupt you, Jim, but talk a little bit about, you were saying that it sort of changed his focus, if nothing else.
Well, what it did in actuality is, all of a sudden, all this attention is being paid to his bass drum, and so all of a sudden he's thinking about it. You know,
Right.
not that he wouldn't have before, because that's, Chris is one of the breakout guys on this record here. I mean, I heard his parts ad nauseum, during the original mix, but still with it brightened up a little bit. Chris is playing great. And yes, I promise you can hear that too now for the first time. Now back to the engineers. Okay. Just one sec. Hardy and Hampton were not exactly the same person, but they knew the same stuff. Okay. Right. Because John was an excellent teacher. I don't think John, other than after they got started, really mentored them at the very beginning of their engineering career.
Right.
Hardy was fantastic. So was Hampton. You can tell by the result of the deluxe record how well it was recorded back then. This is the first 32 track digital that we'd ever worked on, So
right.
So it goes back to credit them how good that stuff sounds,
Jim, while you're a little frozen, so we're going to reconnect you. Let me ask Luther a question. Luther, so one of the things that's really interesting about this record and Jim, his process in general, is there's a whole history of rock and roll on this record in terms of the session players who appeared on it, and we'll talk about them in a minute. But also, your dad was a student of Sam Phillips in a sense, and I know in at least one interview he talked about how he loved Sam Phillips's early work with Howlin' Wolf, or Howlin' Wolf's early records, and how it just sounded like it was sizzling, boiling up from the bottom. And he talked about, and even though this was a digital recording, he would jerry rig it with analog gear and Gates Level Devil, and he had all kinds of ideas that were both sonic and philosophical, I think, in terms of where he was coming from. A lot of that was rooted in this tradition of Memphis music and Sam Phillips. So talk a little bit about, he said a lot of things like he wanted the record to sound like a giant boombox blasting, or how he wanted the sound to come up boiling from the bottom like a Howlin' Wolf record. And I think that's really interesting because it's a record made in the heart of the 80s on a digital rig. And yet, even through all that, you can hear the sort of Jim's intention in there.
That's a great point, Bob, because yes, it was digital, but he would front load the sonics with as many classic old tubes as possible. And he had his own 8-track Ampex original 8-track tube preamps from his old machine that he cut like some of Boomer's story on the Rycuda record. He had his own rig he brought in. But then also at this time at Ardent and studios all over the world, all the classic vintage gear was not being used because everyone was embracing technology. So yeah, the Fairchild, the Gates, all the old tube stuff, he would have them. Like he said, the Fairchild was literally a doorstop at one point, and
that is ridiculous.
Exactly. He would fill the room with all the old vintage stuff that he grew up with, because he was an engineer at Ardent up to 8 tracks,
Yeah.
Right.
So he knew how to work that gear. He loved that gear. Like you said, the compression of early analog recording, there's nothing more he loved than like the sound of Howlin' Wolf's voice, like dominating the audio. And then when he stops singing, here comes the rest of the band, like that old fashioned phenomena of the band's in the room and it's the voice and then it's the band. And you hear the compression sucking it in and out. And he loved to hear that. He loved to hear the tubes working, And,
right.
And once again, it's the hi-fi recording of a digital sound. And one of his points was that at this point, you're making CDs. You're making tapes and vinyl too, but he always embraced the technology and kept up. He thought it was important. And he said, look, it's going digital. Let's embrace it as soon as possible so we're not surprised with the end result. As opposed to being all analog and then you make a CD and you're like, oh, this sounds like shit. Just go ahead and make the digital aspect sound as good as possible, And it was a great experiment and an expensive experiment, This was the height of like the recording, this was a big budget record,
Right.
This was not an indie project, they were big balling.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, the thing that I always think about is how your dad at the time was almost like a Southern dandy, like Trevor Horn.
Yeah.
Time.
Yeah.
Like he's front loaded with all this gear, and he's like, it is like a really great, crunchy, like powerful recording. but he's also going in there with a sampler and just chopping and screwing everything up. And that's amazing. It's like a perfect Matt's situation where we made this great record, but now we're going to mess with it just a little bit. It's wonderful.
And
wonderful work.
it wasn't a proper sampler. It wasn't like an Akai.
Yeah.
It was a Fairlight.
Fairlight, yeah.
Yeah.
So one of the interesting aspects about this is that he was kind of almost, we'll get a little more into that later, but part of this digital rig that he had is Joe Hardy, who was one of the engineers, was kind of the expert at the Fairlight sampler, which you could sort of move, sample things and move them around in tracks, almost like you do now in Pro Tools, cut and paste and stuff. But this was, 10, 15 years before that. And so it's interesting. Again, a lot of people always tend to think of your dad because of his, Memphis background and his roots background and all that kind of stuff as, the guy who would be doing things very traditionally, but he was always embraced new technology. I think his thing was, he said, I'm a modernist, but I'm a primitive modernist.
That's right. Primitive modernism.
So Luther, while we're waiting for Jim, I guess we're having a little technical trouble getting Jim back. Let me ask you, obviously, one of the things that happens on this record is you get an opportunity to play. The Replacements were trying a lot of different styles and I think productions and sort of concepts as well. And one of the songs that sort of lent itself to that was "Shooting Dirty Pool," which it almost plays like a little mini movie. And I know if you listen to the demo that they did in Minneapolis, there was already kind of some stirrings of this. Let me ask, first of all, Jim, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, I don't know why we can't see your picture. Are you
what
there?
I'll do is I'll get off and come back on, maybe, I guess.
Try it, and if not, we'll just do it audio. If nothing else,
go ahead
this is what happens.
Yeah, go ahead and ask the question while you're at it.
Well, Lancaster, let me ask you. So talk a little bit about we're just talking about the shooting dirty pool and kind of some of the things they were doing. But now that we got you, let me ask you this: this record has a lot of different songs, styles of songs on it. And you go from IOU and I don't know these fast rockers to like Nightclub Jitters. And that's almost cocktail jazz. Mm-hmm. So tell us a little bit, when you listen to Nightclub Jitters, there is a very particular bass sound, and you have a great story about where that came from and what it was, and Tommy playing it. Tell us a little bit about kind of them trying things, I guess, in the studio, and specifically as they did on Nightclub Jitters, and a little bit about the dobro bass.
Well, I'll tell you about the dobro bass, and I'm going to tell you about the high string guitar, because as I listened to this mix just recently, that plays a big part in 2 or 3 different songs. But right. The bass, I bought, Dickinson called me one day and said, he'd seen one of Jerry Reed, the country music star. He was in the Burt Reynolds movies, etc. Great guitar player. Had this bass for sale, and they'd never seen one like it. It's actually a dobro bass, like a standard dobro manufacturer. It stayed at the Zebra Ranch for 3 or 4 years. Luther, I'm sure, is very familiar with it. It takes a gorilla to play it, but it sounds unbelievable. And it has a pickup on the neck. It has a pickup on the bottom, and it goes boom, bigger than anything you've heard that can carry a pitch. And right. I've been using it lately a little bit, and I just love it. In fact, if you can't see me, too bad. I brought the bass in here.
Oh no, man! Oh no, this is a tease. Well, it's fascinating because Tommy Stinson, I come to find out, he had actually taken, in band as I think 7th or 8th grade, he had taken some bass lessons. So he knew how to play stand-up bass. And then this was kind of built like a stand-up bass, but it was, had a pickup, was kind of a, modern mutation of it, I suppose. Well, we need to figure out, maybe Jim, can you log off and log back on? Cause we got to see that bass and your face.
We got to see your face.
Sure, I want to see my face.
Okay.
How can I tell you?
Well, I'll talk to Luther. You log off and come back on. So Luther, let's jump back to the Shooting Dirty Pool story. So they have this idea for the song Shooting Dirty Pool. It's kind of about a rock and roll lifestyle barroom fight. It's got all these atmospherics built into the song. And so I think your dad kind of comes up with a concept. Tell us a little bit about the song and how you ended up playing on it at 13 or I guess 14 years old.
Yeah, both. The first session I was 13, and then I turned 14 the second time. And you know, Dad would always bring us to the studio. We'd get to meet everybody and hang out, or sometimes people would come to the house for dinner. But this was special, you know, and they were so cool to let me play, and they were cool to me just hanging out. But then to let me play, that was just unbelievable. And I didn't really play; I was just making sound effects, you know. Dad had this. He was working towards a music video, in his dream, Shooting Dirty Pool would have been a music video, and there would have been a bar fight, and he was trying to like there's the pool game goes awry, and then there's a glass broken, and there's laughter, and all these different. He had it all scripted out basically, so he was literally saying, "Okay, we'll do laughing, and now do some funny Eddie Van Halen guitar noises." You know, what was the other one? Oh, the dive bomb,
right?
You know. And Paul was there, and we were just having fun. And to be honest, we weren't even playing to the track. We were just playing straight into the Fairlight. And then Dad would, just like anything else, Dad, just like the rest of the record, Dad would put it together on the keyboard.
That's
I love the
amazing.
story I just read today where Paul came in and he saw Dad sampling his voice. And Paul was like, "Is that me? Is that me in there?" And Dad's like, "Yep." And he just sat down on the couch, you know, said, "All right, let's do it." Paul, they were game, man, you know. I mean, the horns, the strings, for the most part, they really bought in. Like you said, Nightclub, you know, I mean, to me, though, it's the same family as Here Comes the Regular. Like the piano solo on Here Comes the Regular, you know, it's like, it doesn't come from completely out of left field, you know.
Right.
But they really went with it. And there's Prince Gabe with that beautiful saxophone. And you mentioned the session players that came in, the Memphis musicians who guested. Alex Chilton, you know, that was part of the whole vibe, you know.
Right.
So, I'm not putting myself in that ilk, but Dad was definitely like, "Hey, and let me get my boy on this record," you know.
Yeah, totally.
There's definitely a lot of that going on. But hell, it's been good for my career.
There he is. There's the man.
There it is. Hey.
All right.
Yeah,
Hold
Jim,
on a second.
Bullshit detected. Take precautions.
I don't even know what was said, but I just wanted to do that. I thought that might be funny.
Hey, Jim, let me ask you a question, Lancaster.
Sure.
Family legend has it that they were in your van and they were jumping up and down on your RCA ribbon microphones.
Oh, well, that's right. But I did get them repaired afterwards. They weren't
Okay, all right.
expense, but that's about all I got.
I was like, "Fuck your couch, man."
Jim,
and then Luther, guess what? They got burned up outside. One of my kids started a fire, and when he was a little bitty boy, and you know, I lost those RCA 77s. But anyway.
Lancaster, did you have that dobro handy or the bass?
Yeah, let me just stay still.
Yeah, it's going to be worth it, folks.
Yeah, this bass is fantastic. It lived at our studio for many, many, many moons.
So this is the Nightclub Jitters bass that you hear on Nightclub Jitters. This is made by the Dobo Company.
Company. Trying to hold it up and around, so
yeah,
you know, this is what it
Yes.
looks like. And you know, if you hold it up, it has a stick in the bottom that will release. But them guys at Zebra Ranch, they bent that and.
And now think about this, folks. So this is a kind of basically an electronic bass that Tommy Stinson played on Nightclub Jitters that had been owned by Jerry Reed of Smokey and the Bandit Eastbound and Down fame. So there's your full circle or some kind of journey.
And the neck is the same as a regular double bass in the orchestra. It's not such a big deal. It's just that it's only that thick, and it sounds really, really deep. So I'm gonna take it back over.
Fantastic.
I have a quick Jerry Reed thing. So I'm from Gallatin, Tennessee, which you're in Memphis, Bob, and Luther, you're in Nashville. And Jerry Reed had a mansion in my hometown of Gallatin. So even subconsciously, I'm connected to this record via that weird dobro bass. So this is amazing.
Jim, I'm going to ask you a question, but Luther, let me ask you one more thing. You talked about playing on Shooting Dirty Pool and making all the noise. The very famous story that is included in the liner notes to Pleased to Meet Me Deluxe, which is out now in stores.
It's hilarious, man. These stories are so well put together.
Luther, tell us a story about, there's a line in that song where he said, "You're the coolest guy I ever have smelled or ever did smell." And you came to the studio that day and you made a studio faux pas. Tell that story for the folks that may not know it.
All right. So the first time I came, it was like Dad was showing me around. I was sitting there. He was like, "Hey, Paul, let's do that rhythm guitar on Red Red Wine." So Paul stood there and I watched him play Red Red Wine. And now this is a whole nother story, but he's in open tuning. He's an open G tuning, but playing in the key of F. And no one in Memphis had seen anybody do that before. He's using like punk rock bar chords, but in an open tuning. And, we were all playing like Keith Richards or Furry Lewis. That's where our open tuning was at. But Paul had his own way with it. So I was watching him, and Dad was like, he told me at home, he was like, "You figure out what he's doing." So I was clocking him and watching him, and I nailed it. And then he was like, "Okay, let's get on Shooting Dirty Pool. Hey, Paul, why don't you go do another vocal? Just throw one down, And the thing was, as you can read in the book, Paul was singing different lyrics every time. He didn't have a songbook. He was just spewing, as he called it. This Dad told me he called it spewing. He would just get on the mic and go. And there were reference points, but Dad was keeping every take. And so my faux pas was that I wore what I thought was my cool shirt from 7th grade, but I didn't realize it, but it stank of like Old Spice cologne, so I rolled up in there. And Paul, in the bridge to Shooting Dirty Pool, he sings, "You're the coolest guy I ever have smelt, not a notch on nobody's belt." And I laughed at the moment. I thought, that's funny. He said smelt, But then months later, Dad was like, we're talking about you, don't you? And I'm like, oh, damn. Ouch. So that, if anything, that may be my best.
It's like you had a serious musk about you.
I think we should call that English leather, however. Old Spice being a little uppity,
I'm wearing it right now.
Jim, let me ask you, one of the things that's so fabulous about this record, and I was mentioning it while you were gone, is that there's just a whole history almost of rock and roll in terms of not just yourself and Jim Dickinson and obviously Joe and John and all the records they worked on, but some of the session players that were on there. You're talking guys like Prince Gabe, who was more known in Memphis, but Ben Cauley, who was in the Bar-Kays, the only survivor of the Otis Redding plane crash, and James Alexander from the Memphis Horns, Steve Douglas, who was part of the Wrecking Crew, and of course Alex Chilton comes into play. So you've got this incredible history there. Talk a little bit about, now this is the first time really that the Replacements had guests on the record. And I think part of it was because they were a trio. Bob was out of the band. There was more room. They had you and Jim kind of in there with all these kind of Memphis elements. Talk a little bit about, tell us about Prince Gabe. On the original album, there's a portrait of Prince Gabe that Chris Mars drew because he passed away just a couple weeks after his session, in fact. Yeah. Tell us a little about Gabe and just kind of what it was like bringing some of these Memphis characters in to make this record with the guys.
Well, Memphis has several very well-known saxophone players, and there are 2 or 3 on this record. Now, Prince Gabe and the Millionaires, that was the name of his band, great bass player. I can't call his name right now, but they played all up and down Beale Street. They played the Memphis songs. They played the things that all the Memphians recognized. And Prince was for lack of a better term, it's like a carnival saxophone player. Not that he wasn't good, he was great. Getting to the point of, sometimes spirit will override the note, Right. So Prince was great. And then if you look on some of my photos there, and you'll see Dickinson. Well, I'm in there as well. Dickinson and Ben Cauley and Andrew. This is when we're seriously thinking about Can't Hardly Wait.
Love you.
Want to put the exact right part, not just partially. Now, Dickinson and I were, and I still do it today. Just like I did the vocals on Toots. I had them sing everywhere and just took it off where it wasn't really needed.
Right.
And so anyway, we got and I'll be honest with you, I wasn't crazy about the strings originally, But let me tell you what Jimmy Iovine left out. He left out a wonderful, and I like his mix just fine for radio, but he left out a wonderful production moment at the end of the strings where the guitar slides off. I mean, you know, it's
Right.
a beautiful thing. You don't hide those things.
Right.
And we
And-
live for them.
Yeah, and Jim's talking about there's a mix on this box set that Jimmy Iovine, the very famous Jimmy Iovine, did at the time for radio, and then there's also an alternate mix, and so there's many iterations as well as the original. You can hear this on "Can't Hardly Wait" is what we're talking about. Yeah, Andrew Love. I said James Alexander, but I think Dickinson was very smart in bringing Prince Gabe in first, I believe, because I think he wanted to. Bring somebody in that he knew the replacements would like,
And fellowship,
and that
you know, just
and that opened up all the other people to kind of come in, I think.
well, let me tell you, I love Steve Douglas's part on "I Don't Know," man. I'm telling you, that cooks like frying bacon. I don't know what. And Steve, you know, he played on all the damn Beach Boy records and
Right.
the Wrecking Crew records, the Glenn Campbell records. I mean, he and Jim Horan were the guys, you know, on the coast.
Right.
And so he was a great saxophone player. But let me just pay tribute to Drew.
Right.
I just can't. I have yet to hear in my life anyone more soulfully melodic than Andrew Love, and it brings a tear to the eye. Let me just tell you. Because anyway, Andrew's on there. Can't think of any other sax guy.
Yeah. Well, it's Prince Gabe, Ben, James Alexander. I keep saying James Alexander, Andrew Love, rather, of the Memphis Horns, and Steve Douglas. So it's a really incredible cast of folks. Luther, what? And then the one person who plays only one note on "Can't Hardly Wait" or a little squiggle is Alex Chilton. He came in and he did his little sparkly fill there. Jim, what do you remember about now? The Replacements and Alex had known each other and sort of hung in the same circles, and obviously they had the song Alex Chilton on this record, which I think the idea originally was for Alex to play on Alex Chilton, but he decided he didn't want to do that. He wanted to play on "Can't Hardly Wait" and came in and laid his one little lick on it. But what do you remember about Alex? I mean, obviously Jim and Alex had a relationship, and Alex had a relationship with Art. And do you remember him being around? I know Paul said he would walk around the studio barefoot and listen to something like "Shooting Dirty Pool" and probably roll his eyes and walk out. But what are your memories of?
You know, you got to realize, you know, we were, whether some of us liked each other or we got along or not, we were all a team. You know,
Right.
You know, and Alex, what do you mean? I mean, it was no different on Replacement Day, except he came in and played the guitar some, and he sat around and would listen from time to time.
Right.
And I think Alex, and I noticed Paul said something about this, but I think Alex felt like, well, you know, I don't really need to be supported, or, you know, I mean, I appreciate this dedication, but, you know, I mean, I'm still Alex, you know, and
Right.
and so, but I mean, it never became a thing, you know,
Right.
or an issue. But you know what? There are some, and you probably know this, Bob. You're probably listening to the mixes. There's some more Alex, you know, on
Right.
"Can't Hardly Wait," and I believe one of the mixes I heard, he's playing. They turned it up. In other words, it's right in the middle of the song. Maybe it is the solo. I can't remember.
Cool.
It's
Right.
on the rough mix. It's a little bit more prominent. And
Cool.
That's
Yeah.
it, Jason.
Yeah.
And you know, I like that. The guitar sounds shitty, you know. I mean, and he's playing a great part. You know, it's
Right.
lo-fi, hi-fi.
Right.
And so Alex did really, really good. But you know, Alex floated around kind of like the mentor spirit that he could be from time to time.
Right.
Alex was a cool figure, like transitional, because like when the Sex Pistols came to Memphis, Dad saw him, you know, on that famous Sex Pistols tour, and that was when he first touched his toes. But Alex really brought the punk rock thing, and with his band, the Panther Burns, when he joined Tab Falco and the Panther Burns, you know, it all started with Big Star Third, with the deconstructionalism, you know. Like you listen to the demos from Big Star Third, even Holocaust is a beautiful pop song. It could have been produced so beautifully, but it became so deranged. Downs, another example. The demo of Downs is beautiful, and it's the most twisted recorded version of that song you can imagine. You know, Dad and Alex got into deconstructionalism, and that goes back to Like a Kangaroo. That's a whole nother story.
Right.
But when Dad produced Like a Kangaroo, because it started with a guitar, just a guitar and a voice, and Dad layered those overdubs on, he said Alex saw that how fucked up it could be, you know, and that led to him joining Panther Burns, which is like there would be no, you know, punk blues. The whole punk blues genre is heavily rooted, even if they don't know it, in Tab Falco, Panther Burns, and that Memphis, Mississippi scene. But I digress. But Alex and my dad's band Mudboy and the Neutrons, they were experimenting heavily with like punk attitude and punk presentation and making really free balling rock and roll, like Flies on Sherbert, the Alex record, you know. And then Alex brought the Cramps to town, which was a great influence on Dad because he spent the night with them and recorded Redheaded Woman.
And it's funny you say all this because, you know, you're talking about Alex and Jim and the deconstructionalism that starts on a Big Star Third and goes into like Flies on Sherbert, and then Alex's production with the Cramps.
Right.
Well, Alex had produced some demos for the Replacements in early 1985. And it's funny, when I talked to Paul, he said, you know, we thought it was going to be this wild, crazy thing. And he was actually very professional because I think at that point he knew it was like for a major label and he wanted, you know, and he's like, he was almost too professional for us. And, you know, you forget that, you don't forget that Alex came from the Dan Penn, Chips Moman, beautiful productions of the Box Top School too. So he could go either way. Yeah. And I think, you know, something like Alex Chilton in the song in its own way, and certainly Can't Hardly Wait, you know, has that Box Tops feel to it. And there's pop songs on this record that have, you know, there's songs on this record that straddle a line between that deconstructionalist thing, like Shooting Dirty Pool, and then you've got your beautiful pop moments as well. But they're all kind of Memphis in their own way. You know, so while pause for 1 second, and I want to remind folks that if you would like to order the Replacements Pleased to Meet Me Deluxe Edition, you can do so at RHINO.com. It's also available at all your finer record retailers and online and so forth. But really, you can stream it and all that stuff. But really, folks, you want this, and you want the. I think we might even have some. Now it's like QVC all of a sudden. But I think we might have some bundles left, deluxe bundles. It's really a beautiful package. You get the vinyl, you get the 1 LP, 3 CDs, and so forth. Jim, let me ask you one of the things that's so great, and Marty, if you want to flip up the photo of Tommy Stinson in his Arden Maxwell. There's a picture of Tommy Stinson playing a green Stratocaster. One of the things we're really excited about on this box set is we have 3 Tommy Stinson songs written, sung by Tommy, and he plays guitar and bass on those that are on the demos disc. And there's just an absolutely unbelievable song that is the penultimate track on the box called Trouble on the Way that Mr. Jim Lancaster plays bass, and I believe Mr. John Hampton plays drums on. And it is a Tommy song. And Tommy at this point was 19, maybe had just turned 20. And was, you know, really starting to develop his songwriting in the band. Jim, tell us a little bit about that session, how that came about. It obviously didn't end up on the record. Now it's the first time it's out officially. But I just think, you know, you listen to those Tommy tracks in general and specifically Trouble on the Way, and man, it's just, there's an energy there that's just incredible. So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, like I said, spirit goes beyond notes sometimes. I don't know what to tell you, but actually, Dickinson had something to do one day. He said, look, like every now and then he would do things for me because he and I were partners. We had this boogie we did with bands and stuff that seemed to work. He gave me some Fred Ford outtakes after the Beale Street Saturday night, etc. So what was the question, Bob? Sorry, I got.
Well, just how did it come about that Jim just said, hey, we got some time. Why don't you take Tommy and do some of his songs?
Oh, Tom, yeah. Well, so I picked Tommy up at the airport, and Tommy says, you know, Tommy and I, part of my job as what you call minder was making sure that, you know, when it was session time, we were within the hour, you know, basically, and but really it was taking care of Tommy. You know, because Tommy was 18 maybe. Right. And so anyway, he and I developed, you know, a little kind of boogie relationship together, you know, and I don't even think you develop those kind of relationships anymore. But anyway, so Tom said, Tom said, I wrote some songs. I said, well, let's go, man. Nobody's in the studio but me and you.
Okay.
And so we had Hampton, because the studio was already booked. And so we went in and he played the songs and I played the bass. I sat there and got Hampton to go play the drums. We ran it down a couple of times. This is the only assistant engineer part that I basically did. I pushed go when it was time, and Tommy played that green guitar that you were just looking at, and I played the bass. Who knows? I hardly ever owned one up until then, except this big son of a bitch. But anyway, and Hampton played drums, and so we just cut this kicking track. I mean, really, what I was doing as a bass player was I was making fun of Tommy, and as it turns out, hell, I'm more proud of that bass part than I am.
Yeah, dude.
Thing I ever did.
You should be. You should
I
be.
thought
It
it was Tommy.
Yeah.
I thought it was Tommy.
Well, there's a moment in the mix that we did, which you guys cut that 9 times. You cut
Did we?
nine takes of Trouble on the Way. And this still really cool, like little harmonic moment that you do. It's killer, dude. It is.
Thank you.
Very, very good. Very, very good. But yeah, there's a moment in one of the bridges where Tommy yells out, "Play that bass, Lancaster!" And it's awesome. It's awesome.
Well, look, it's either me or Dickinson on the organ, and I'm pretty sure it's me, but who knows? We didn't quite get it up loud enough this time, but it's a kicker. I mean, the whole song, Tommy's whole attitude, one freaking note, and you can tell this ain't no bullshit. This guy,
Yep.
Mhm.
and I'm gonna tell you, we made a big mistake by letting Tommy talk y'all out of putting the ballad on, because it's great.
there was two songs that he cut in our and one of them we couldn't quite get on, but who knows, maybe for the extra deluxe edition in 2057
Yeah, there you go. 100%.
Can we talk about Tommy for a second? Oh, and Paul,
of course,
and Tommy, 'cause,
yeah.
I mean, those guys. But Dad admired them so much, and they pushed Dad. Like Tommy, he was fucking with Dad about the bass sound. Like he would play Dad records, like the Butthole Surfers in particular, and say, "I want my bass to sound like this. Like that's not right." And they said that was Tommy's amp in Ardent was the loudest thing that had ever hit Memphis. Like it was resonating the whole building. It was in this closet, and it was just like shaking the whole place. But it was hard to capture and recreate the illusion of how loud that was. And Dad gave me the record once again. It was what was it? I can't remember the name of the song, Butthole Surfers, but the bass is totally gnarly. And Dad really respected Tommy a lot. He called him the existential rock and roll hero because, as he said, he didn't have a choice. Bob put the bass in his hand at such a young age. He just grew up playing rock and roll. He didn't have a choice. And he's so hardcore. And even to this day, like when you hear a Tommy Stinson song, you know it. And it's got this melancholy, melodic landscape that many people of the area, Prince included, they all touch on this. It's like Memphis music. It's like there's a vibe about music from that area, Minneapolis, that you can really, you can put your finger on it. And Tommy's got it so much. And that classic Replacements vibe, melodic, like the melodic tension that Westerberg mastered, Tommy has continued to push that and experiment that even to this day. His last solo record was off the chain.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
And
dude.
Paul, and reading this is so cool how cooperative Paul was. There's a whole thing like, I won't give you 100%, but at the end of the whole story with the Ledge, Dad was like, he gave 110%.
Right.
It's like by the end of it, Paul had spilled his blood and guts into that recording studio. Like those guys. And they really did come to break up. The first songs they recorded were Beer for Breakfast and Distortion Lake and all these crazy like sabotage songs.
They came in November on Election Day, actually, which is where that song comes from. And Lancaster brought them in there. And And yeah, that was a trial session. They hadn't necessarily agreed to do the record at Arden with your dad, but the results were, I think, good enough, and the vibe was good enough that they decided, well, let's keep going. And again, I think this is the only Replacements record that was made truly as a trio, as a three-piece. And when I talked to Joe Hardy, sadly gone, just like John Hampton, he said, an album is a record is like a pie. If there's four people, there's four pieces, you get less of the pie. If there's three, you get more of a pie. And I think in a way, each of those guys stepped up in their performance and what they were doing, and the sound as a three-piece solidified. And then at the same time, Jim Lancaster, Jim Dickinson, and all the session players, they added all these textures and colors to that record. So I think it's unique in the Replacements catalog, in terms of what you hear. And there was obviously so much more music. I mean, one of the cool things here, Lancaster, tell us a little bit about this. There's all these songs here of, Route 66 and different covers that you guys would do. Tell us a little bit about kind of playing in the studio, because I remember Paul saying, that was the first time we ever hung out with actual musicians and jammed and hung out. Talk a little bit about that, because that was unique for them.
Well, we at some point, we're all in the control room, and the control room is big enough for us to all play except for the drummer, right? Except for Chris.
Right.
And so we all just said, let's change instruments, which we did. And and Paul would like to go off in the middle of any particular song after having only sung a verse or maybe a verse and a chorus and go into a Burt Bacharach freaking song. You know what I'm saying? So, and I always thought that was great. I think songs are too long anyway. But Paul was always on point. He played the guitar. I mean, I know you, having mixed it, know what a good guitar player he is, even if he tosses it aside. He is a good guitar player. And just like Alex, in
so unique.
Way, he's unique in a way, and like Alex is unique in his way. What were we talking about, Bob? We're going to do what?
Oh no, that's actually a good jumping off point, because one of the things I was curious about was the guitar playing. And Luther, you can speak to this a little bit. You talked about it earlier, just kind of figuring out Paul playing in open tunings, that we associate with Keith Richards and kind of blues musicians, but he was playing sort of punk rock bar chords. There's some really hot solos on this record. What a lot of people don't know is that Paul, before he joined the Replacements and became a singer-songwriter, he had been a lead guitar player playing in, 70s cover bands in Minneapolis and stuff. And he really, in addition to being an incredible and unique rhythm player, he could actually play some leads. But of course, Bob Stinson was in the band for the first 7 years, so he didn't have to do it. But he pulls out a lot of really interesting stuff here. I mean, you listen to the lead on The Ledge, you listen to some of the other stuff. It's just, talk a little bit about, because I'm sure you were watching him pretty closely as a 13, 14-year-old. Talk a little bit in general about his style, or what you remember, just kind of his approach and carrying this record as the only guitarist, really.
When it comes to guitar, it really all comes down to the melody. It's a strong rock and roll melodic instrument. And Paul's melodic sense is, second to none. I mean, he created that whole genre that so many people dwell in, and we were just, Cody, my brother, he just turned me on to a clip of them doing a Left of the Dial, and if you watch that on YouTube, it's from the reunion tour. Like he's playing a G chord up a whole step. So he's in open G tuning, and it's a straight G chord, but it's up a whole step. And you look at it and you're like, what is he doing? It makes no sense. And for a guitar player, it's hard to even fathom what he's doing, but it's mind blowing. It's totally unique. Like I said, Keith Richards, all the blues guys, the folk guys, the banjo players. But Westerberg took open G tuning to a whole nother place. And Shooting Dirty Pool, that's in an open B tuning that he invented that I've still not figured out. These things are impossible to play.
Marty, will you put up that picture of Jim Dickinson and a young Luther Dickinson real quick?
That's that shirt.
There's the shirt.
There you go.
That was a pointing guitar, man.
He does. Dickinson's got his flannel on.
There you go. Oh, look at that gold necklace, man. Damn, that's embarrassing. But dude. What can I say? But man,
hey Luther, I think you did some of that crossover stuff, with your right hand, where you went up here and did some weirdness.
Yeah, man.
I never saw that before,
So
I know what I wanted to say. was
Oh,
that
yes, okay.
Dad used to bemoan the fact in his mind, he said, Westerberg didn't bring me an anthem. He's like, I wish we'd have had a Bastards of Young or a Left of the Dial. But what I wish I could tell him, what I wish you could have seen was I saw 2 shows in London on the reunion tour a few years back. And man, they played so many songs from Pleased to Meet Me. And that whole venue was singing along. And it was, they are anthems, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable.
I thought the same thing, Luther, when I heard him say that the other day. When I read that about what Bob said that Bob wrote in the book there, the novel. Yeah.
It's funny. I asked Paul that night. I said, Paul, is it true that you didn't have any lyric sheets and you were making it up every time? He was like, well, I don't remember. Maybe.
Well,
Well,
yeah.
Well,
I
that's
mean, it's
he
like
would
what
bring
you
them
said.
in every day. You know,
Yeah.
he would bring them in, and it might not have gotten to Dickinson, but just like the guitars, we kept every guitar that he put on there. Y'all probably know this from looking at the mix. There are a lot of guitars, and maybe on one guitar track, it's good for the bridge, and it's killer, you know?
Yep.
And, you know, and of course, Ardent is known for their guitar sounds via Terry Manning and Jim Dickinson and, you know, all the guys that came before us because they blasted out these killer guitar sounds. You know, look at Gibbons, you know, and Terry, you know. So we're known for our guitar sounds at Ardent, but this is even better.
Yeah. Well, just looking at in having the pleasure of going through all the tracking sheets and listening to all the various multi-tracks associated with the recording, there are, like how you were saying earlier, that there are certain phrases that would pop up in every single take lyrically, but he's also riffing off of certain things that would pop into his head. It's pretty crazy. And also the guitar tracks, you are right, Jim. There are a lot of guitar tracks all over those songs. And also like interesting things that like we couldn't even put on the box, like a weird 12-string version of Alex Chilton and all kinds of wild stuff.
Yeah, they did a lot of recording from this, and as Jim says very presciently said at the time, he said, I think they learned a lot about making records doing Pleased to Meet Me, and they took it out on the next 2 producers, which is absolutely true.
Absolutely true.
We're almost at our 1 hour mark. We'll probably just go a couple minutes over. Don't want to keep you guys too much longer, but let me couple things here that I just wanted to touch on before we went. Marty, will you put up the photo of the handshake with Seymour? So the story of this record is, unusually, they ended the making of this record by flying out about 40 people from Warner Brothers, including Seymour Stein, who's on the far left, and Michael Hill, who's their A&R man. And there's the band presenting the tape to Seymour and the handshake and everything. And I know, Luther, you were probably too young to be invited to the party because it was adults only, but they had a playback party at Ardent. And Jim, just tell me, what are your recollections of that night? I mean, that is a pretty famous story. I think Seymour, who knew Jim very well from the late 60s, going back.
Buck a White record.
Right. Buck a White record in the Country Blues Festival. So Seymour and Dickinson had a history. And I think Seymour loved Justine's, which was an old French Cajun restaurant, a French Creole restaurant that was down here. So I think, as Seymour put it, I just wanted to have dinner at Justine's and do it on Warner Brothers dime and bring everybody out. But Lancaster, what do you remember in general? I mean, it must have felt like it was a big deal. I know that record companies didn't generally fly 40 people out from across New York and LA to come listen to a record in Memphis quite so often.
No, that's true. We were surprised that as many Warner Brothers folks showed up as did. It was a great party. You know, the Mats had just busted out to one of the thrift stores and picked themselves up some suits, and they'd shaved their eyebrows a little bit. And
they did that later. Yeah.
Well, they did that later. Yeah. The party was really pretty interesting. The one thing that I truly remember is people coming up to me from the different Warner Brothers guys and going, "Man, how does it feel to have sung, to be on a replacement track?" And I'm going, just hang my heart, you know. But I mean, I had like 5 or 6, maybe more, come up and go, well, the Replacements never had anybody on their records before, and I'm going,
right.
Well, I mean, geez, I lived with them for 6 months, so. you know, and we bonded up a little bit there. By the time we played those EPs or whatever it is, you know, the Route 66 and Tossing and Turning, and you got some of that wrong. Like I'm playing bass on Tossing and Turning,
Right.
and but we all switched up. I play, you know, different things, but we were just having fun, you know, and not to mention some of them sound pretty. You know, some of them sound adequate for a collector. You know,
Well,
so,
it goes back to something Luther said that Jim said is misery sticks to tape, and I think fun sticks to tape too. And I think listening to this record, you can hear the spirit and the fun and the fact that they were, you know, this is a band that had almost broken up, you know, a couple months before, having the time of their lives, you know, and making some really great music that obviously has lasted the test of time. So before we wrap up, we got a few questions, I guess, from fans that Jason's going to check out. And just again, before, just to remind you, if you want to get a copy of The Replacements, Pleased to Meet Me Deluxe Edition, it is available at RHINO.com and all your fine retailers. So Jason, why don't you take it away? I think Jim, Luther, there might be a couple questions
There's a
for
couple,
you guys can answer from
yeah,
the
a couple of questions from the fans out there. Luther, first one for you. Do you remember what guitar and amp you used on Shootin' Dirty Pool?
Oh man, it was an Electra Westone. It was a heavy metal Flying V, not even a proper Flying V, just an awful thing. Like they say, corny guitars give you VD, but it had an early Floyd Rose with non-locking Floyd Rose, so I could scrape behind the nut, you know.
Right on.
And that was man, that was my. God damn, I put a lot of time on that guitar, man.
Awesome.
But it was funny, you know. It was comedy, you know. They had a great sense of humor, and Dad loved it. And it was all it was tongue in cheek, you know.
Yeah. They also asked if you were on the demo, and I can answer that. No, he's not. That's Paul doing his shredding. On that demo.
And Paul can do it.
Oh yeah, dude. No, that's one of the things that was awesome to just listen to on the demos that we put on this package. Is, dude, Paul can rip. I knew Paul could rip, but I was like, dude, this is insane. Mr. Lancaster, question for you. You spent lots of time during the recording of Pleased to Meet Me with Paul, Tommy, and Chris. What did you like most about each of them?
Well, I like number one, Paul, because he was a songwriter.
Yeah.
I can identify with that. I mean, my roots go back where y'all don't even want to know, but I mean, it basically is all about a song to me. And so Paul was a songwriter, and maybe he didn't have it written down A, B, B, C, A, or whatever, you know, and maybe he came in with the lyrics a verse at a time, but it doesn't matter. You know, so I identified with Paul in that way. Plus, I really did like the way he played. You know, Tommy, I like Tommy. I mean, Tommy's 18, and man, he's just, you know, in the prime of his life. And here he is, you know, just whipping the bass and doing great. He just fired his brother. He ain't just a regular 18. He's an 18 that fired Bob. You know. And so in Memphis, we had a lot of fun together. When I say a lot of fun, I'm not talking about, well, we might have done our share of illegals, but when I say a lot of fun, after that, we would go see Fred Ford and Honeymoon Garner, and you know, sometimes Phineas Newman Jr. would show up at the Peabody, you know. And so if you can imagine that cross section, you know, here I am with the Mats, who, you know, all the girls from 13 to 16, you know, think Paul is a poet, you know, which he is, but recognize him as such in public. And here we are with Fred Ford and Honeymoon Garner. Man, I'm going to tell you, that's a culture clash, not a clash.
Yeah.
It worked great, man. It's Memphis, you know. So we did stuff like that. You know, I played them. I would take them around. Production. Listen, if you know you're being produced, the producer has lost. Okay? You know,
100%, dude. Right on. Yes.
Motherfucker, where the person you're working with doesn't know, or else you don't have a chance. You know, because they're going to insert their. Let me tell you, the replacements are not pretentious at all. Not when I was working with them. And I mean, they really didn't care what you thought of them. Of course, I don't much care myself, but they're not pretentious. And for me to like one note of music, if I hear one pretentious note, my ass is gone. I'm out of there. I don't have time for it, and ain't too many breaths before death. So
Awesome.
I do not want to hear pretension.
Yeah.
I never hear it out of this guy right here talking about Luther.
And you will not hear it in any of the 55 songs. I'm pleased to meet me. Well, Jim, Luther, I want to thank you again for taking the time, not just on today, but in helping with the liner notes on this, helping with the book. You guys have been really great, because obviously, sadly, not to end on a sad note, but so many of the folks that were involved in this record, starting with Jim Dickinson, Joe Hardy, John Hampton, John Fry, Ben Cawley, Andrew Love, Prince Gade, Steve Douglas, the men who helped make this record, they're all gone. And but the music lives on, and it really, I think, we're very proud that we could kind of bring the totality of this record and all the fun sessions and everything in one place. So I want to thank you guys for kind of being the witnesses here who were there and sharing it with the fans and everybody else. So thank you again. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Luther. Thank you, Jim. We'll roll it out with a little video. And again, if you haven't gotten it yet and you want to get it, go to RHINO.com and you will be able to pick up the Pleased to Meet Me deluxe edition. So thanks again for everybody who tuned in, and we'll see you another time.
Yeah. Thank you all.
It's Halloween.